thank you and your family for the opportunity, the privilege of being able to see firsthand some of your passion in action and your ingenuity and your entrepreneurial spirit and your stewardship of this remarkable property and the region that we call home. Look, I'm honored to be here because we've been waiting for this moment for some time to ask the rhetorical question and answer it. Are we out of the drought? Is the drought over in the state of California? And what I want to affirm your instinct that it should be, it feels like it is and continues to be complicated. And I know that's disappointing for some because it would be nice to have a governor say the drought is over. But unfortunately, the complication requires nuance. And today we're advancing a more nuanced advancement of some of our executive orders, 81 provisions that have been laid out since April of 2021, in substantially reducing those number of provisions on the basis of what has occurred over the course of the last number of months. I will remind you, we came out of the 3 driest years in recorded history. In the last 3 weeks, we've experienced still debating whether 1862 eclipsed the last 3 weeks in terms of this being the wettest 3-week period in California history. So when we talk about weather whiplash, we talk about extremes. No denying that reality for those that have lived through that reality here in the state of California. So it is incumbent upon us to recognize that and to recognize that the conditions have radically changed throughout the state, but not enough in places like Klamath and around the Colorado River Basin to call for the end of the drought in California. In every other part of the state, substantial improvements with one major exception, and it's what brings us out here today, and that's the issue of groundwater. And that's why it's incumbent upon us to continue to maintain our vigilance and maintain some provisions of the executive order to allow for fast tracking of groundwater replenishment projects, stormwater capture, and recycling programs here in the state of California. So from 81 provisions down to 33. The reduction in provisions include the following. We're eliminating that 15% voluntary requirement or voluntary conservation target. We are eliminating the mandate of mandates, what was referred to as level 2 drought application of the 450 or so water agencies in the state of California to advance their own localized mandates as it relates to water conservation. So those 2 provisions pursuant to the executive order that I'll be signing today will no longer be in effect. I'll remind you in December, and I want to thank the people of the state of California, we hit 17.1% water conservation in December. That 15% voluntary request came out well over a year ago. It was stubborn for a while, and then people finally picked it up. But as Wade said, as Secretary Crowfoot said, we need to, and the supervisor made this point as well, be mindful that we've got to conserve as a way of life. And as a consequence of that, we're not going to pull away from some of our wasteful practices and try to mitigate and reduce those wasteful practices. So we're going to maintain provisions as it relates to ornamental irrigation and folks out there, washing down their driveways. For the moment, we want to keep those provisions in place. We want to keep those provisions on groundwater and fast-tracking permits in place. We want to maintain a recognition of, again, what's happening north and south in the Colorado and the Klamath Basin. At the same time, we want to eliminate the stress and anxiety around meeting those voluntary mandates, but again, encouraging people to maintain their vigilance. Wildfires end, that doesn't end a state of emergency. So we're going to maintain the drought components as we address the consequences of 3 years of major drought. And that's foundational, again, in the executive order that we're advancing here today. I should note, and I'll repeat for those that are not familiar, that this state has put an unprecedented amount of resource into improving and modernizing our conveyance, our diversion infrastructure, investments in groundwater replenishment, and strategies around stormwater capture. I can't make up for the last 40, 50 years, but I can demonstrably say that $8.6 billion that we've approved in the last few years, we're putting those dollars to work. We're fast-tracking the time to these projects and the permitting in these projects. Just on March 10th, I advanced another executive order to take advantage of some of these more extreme weather patterns coming in, the 12th atmospheric river that we just experienced a few days ago. And we're doing everything we can to continue on those long-term projects, including sites nearby, including projects that were set forth in the 2014 bond, Proposition 1, 2.77 million acre feet as components of those 7 storage projects, above ground and below ground. But again, emphasis now on a deeper understanding, appreciation, and respect for Mother Nature and her storage capacity. It's not just what you see, it's what you don't see that foundationally is the treasure trove in terms of California water and water policy. And that's a very focused effort now, working with folks like Brian and his family and his teams to incentivize these kinds of projects you see around us all throughout the state of California. At the same time, restoring some of our natural systems and wetlands and creating flood protection that is more historically traditional than some of these levees, of which, of course, will invest more resources in protecting communities and farms and the like as it relates to levee protection as well. So $8.6 billion, 142 specific actions, an updated plan with numeric goals on stormwater capture as it relates to recycling and groundwater replenishment, 800,000 acre feet, 500,000 acre feet, 250,000 acre feet, and a time frame that does justice to the frustration many of us have in the state to getting things done. And again, that comes back to why I'm here. We're not eliminating that fast track authority. I want to keep the momentum. I want to move these projects. We have strike teams on these larger projects. We've got point people that are now accountable. We're trying to move whatever we need to move, be it federal, be it local, regional, rules and regulations in a responsible way, respectful way to get these projects moving, including some of the larger diversion programs and modernization programs in this state, and be it St. Louis Reservoir and getting that 135,000 more acre feet, and working with the feds and continue to work with Bureau of Reclamation and our partners at the federal government to do more in terms of the canal restorations and rehabilitation programs, et cetera. So that's why we're here. It's a milestone, but we're not fully out of the woods. But none of us, and I'll just close on this, none of us could have imagined, we were having this conversation yesterday, a few months ago, that we'd be where we are today. I don't think there was an expert that would have laid claim that this was possible. I mean, these are things you may have read about in the 1800s. But Mother Nature, as we say, always bats last. She bats 1,000. And we have to respect and recognize that we designed a water delivery system for a world that no longer exists. When we talk about the hot's getting a lot hotter and the wet's getting a lot wetter and the dry's getting a lot drier, it requires us to reimagine a water delivery, storage, and conservation system in this state. And I want the folks of California to know we take that seriously with a sense of deep urgency, mindful of how quickly conditions can change, and with a deep appreciation that the economy and the well-being and livelihood and health and safety of millions and millions of Californians is at stake if we do not meet these moments and continue to maintain our vigilance. So with that, I will sign the executive order, and we will move forward in terms of processing these new provisions and eliminating many other provisions related. It's not that complicated. It's that easy. So with that, we are happy to answer any questions.
Governor, this is Adam Beam from the Associated Press. You certainly have taken many actions to conserve water during the drought and during this recent period of storms. But there's some environmental groups that have criticized your management of the water, saying that it has come at the expense of fish and other endangered species. I know the commercial salmon fishing season is likely to close this year. And so I'm just wondering, with that in mind, do you feel that your policies have been, broad-based, or do you feel that they've done some harm to the environment?
No, absolutely not. And please, and Adam, you know this well, that what occurs with the salmon, that happened 3 years ago. So anyone who suggests otherwise is being purposely misleading or unknowingly misleading. I think it's more the former often in terms of what I hear out there and some of the extreme statements that are made. We have experts advising us. I take these issues seriously. I'll take a backseat to no governor in the United States of America in terms of my environmental stewardship and passion. I take these very, very seriously. But we have a responsibility to one another to also recognize the nature of change. Things are not static. They're not the way they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so we have to be more nimble. We have to be more flexible. And that's exactly what our teams advised me to do. And I appreciate their advice. And we moved within weeks to make augmentations on the basis of, again, new storms coming in and the like. I should note, we have one conveyance project with many of these same groups opposed that could have captured some 228,000 acre feet just in the month of January that would have allowed us more stored water also for salmon and smelt, hatch and other, to make sure during those warmer months that we have cooler water and water flows. So no is the answer to the question.
Hi, Mackenzie Mays with the LA Times. Why remove even the voluntary reduction? If it's already voluntary, what's sort of the expected impact out of that piece?
Well, I want, when we need it, I want folks to know we need it. I don't want to live in a permanent state. I want a permanent state of a mindset of conservation. I think we've done that. Look, we came out of the last 5-year drought into this new year drought with substantially lower consumption of water. We made it a way of life. That's why it was even more difficult with these voluntary standards to go even further and deeper. And we finally got there in December. November, December, you really started to see those goals being met, 14+%, 17+% in December. But we're in a position where, on the basis of the localism that is ultimately driving these decisions, remember, that's what the level 2 plans were. It was a mandate of local mandates, not one size fits all. Not one size fits all. That a one size fits all policy at 15%, we don't believe is necessary at this moment, and we're not intending to. We just eliminated that provision with this executive order.
Governor, thanks for taking the time. It's Eitan Wallace here with Nexstar. And I don't normally mention all the stations I report for, but just for today, it's KSWB at Fox 5 down in San Diego and KTLA in Los Angeles. The reason I mention that is, as you already mentioned, with the Colorado River, yep. For those folks, what do you want those folks to know, though, down in San Diego who rely on that, and also, I guess, Klamath as well, though, up there, about their situation and how this impacts them? Yeah, I mean, we're not out of the woods. Klamath, not out of the woods in the Colorado Basin. I was just down there with the team a few days ago in Imperial County. We were talking to some leaders in that region and only underscoring, highlighting the hydrology in that region and the unique conditions that persist. As you know, we're one of 7 states that are users, including Mexico, of the Colorado River. We've been negotiating terms of reduction in terms of the use of the Colorado River. We all agree universally that we need to reduce consumption. It's the application of how that we continue to pursue. I've had some very good conversations with the governor of Arizona, who's actively engaged. We're working through some of our unique perspectives in relationship to the other states, and we're looking forward to making progress. I will say this, I feel very confident in our ability to meet the expectations of all of those states and meet the expectations of the Biden administration, who's also been instrumental in helping lead us and coordinate those efforts. As it relates to Klamath, talk about some of the wettest parts of the country. I never thought in my lifetime I'd see conditions up there. We were just up, a few months ago. We're removing those dams, the largest river restoration, largest dam removal project in U.S. history. And we're mindful that we still have conditions there that are unique and distinctive from other parts of the state. Remember, I cannot repeat this enough. One of the critical lessons we learned from the last 5-year drought is each and every region in the state has unique conditions. And one of the principal recommendations that came in the after drought action report
that was submitted to the legislature that I encourage everyone to read is when we move into a drought and we move into requiring new rules and regulations, we should move out of the drought similarly by looking at regions uniquely and distinctly. I will remind you that it was April of 2021 that up near Mendocino County where we announced just a 2-county drought, and we kept expanding that based upon unique conditions. And what we've seen, because of just the extraordinary amount, trillions and trillions of gallons of water throughout the state, is the vast majority of the state is no longer in those drought conditions, but few regions still persist and remain.
Hi, Governor. Daniela Pardo with Spectrum News. You mentioned new levy investments that you're proposing. Are there other specific things that the state is doing to support communities throughout California do what's being done here?
Well, we can specifically have that answered by my experts, but we're putting look, that $8.6 billion includes resources across the spectrum for these kinds of projects. I put another $327 million for flood protection in the January budget and request that support of the legislature, additional resources. As you know, we have criteria of consideration that is become a criteria of concern for low-income communities in this state with levies, that there's a local match. You've got the folks in the feds at the federal level, the Corps of Engineers, that is responsible for a lot of levies, but they have a local match. And a lot of communities can't afford the local match. Last year, as you may know, the state committed itself now near Monterey County to help support that local match. And so we're looking at strategies in that space to offset those burdens and those considerations. Beyond that, we are, I can't tell you how many projects I've personally been to in terms of some of these levee improvement projects, billions of dollars across, again, a spectrum of supports that include levees and then efforts around groundwater replenishment and stormwater capture. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about some of the more novel projects as of late.
Well, I would just start by saying, since 2019, when we've been in the grips of this drought and flood was very distant from everyone's mind, our governor, our legislature continue to make those flood investments, over $1 billion, that drew down almost $3 billion of federal funding. So the good news has been that continued investment in flood safety. Now, we've also been focused on building out more natural infrastructure to protect communities from floods and these multi-benefit floodplains. So for those who live in Sacramento, when you drive over the causeway toward Davis and the Bay Area, you're going over an amazing natural floodplain and natural infrastructure to protect downriver communities from flooding. So there are hundreds of millions of dollars into those projects as well. And then as it relates to groundwater recharge, we know that fields and landscapes are passively being recharging as the rains have flowed into California or come down. But we also know that managed recharge projects to actually concentrate waters and floodwaters to soils that can quickly percolate into groundwater basins is a critical, important part of our infrastructure future. And our Department of Water Resources has funded dozens of projects in the last 2 years alone with hundreds of millions of dollars of the funding that the governor referenced. So these are projects like the ones that you're looking at here today across our state focused on expanding groundwater recharge.
Hello, Ashley Zavala with KCRA3. Governor, I know your administration is bracing for challenging river conditions this spring and summer, potentially also historic snow melt. How is your administration preparing for that aspect of all of this?
We're mapping all that out. I mean, we have a snowpack last week, 227% of normal, basically 2 years of snowpack now in the Sierras, which is just extraordinary. And we're very mindful. I without getting personal, I got a good friend of mine in Colorado send me a bunch of videos of a similar circumstance they had about a decade and a half ago, or maybe it was 2 decades ago, of videos just reminding me of what could occur if you get some warm weather or warm water, meaning rain, during the spring with these with this snowpack. And so we're very mindful of that. And that's why we're eager to maintain the provisions in these executive orders that allow us to continue to move forward aggressively, continue to protect these critical areas, and to focus again on a socioeconomic frame, which is just highlighted and underscored by what's happened on the Central Coast and the Central Valley. And and the challenges we're experiencing. We have our whole team out there right now, Office of Emergency Service everywhere else in Tulare Lake Basin, trying to address those critical issues. So deeply mindful, and we'll be very aggressive in terms of being focused on pre-positioning of assets and making sure that we're communicating to the public those risks in real time.
I know you didn't want to do a one-size-fits-all approach to this drought situation. The only, I guess, one-size-fits-all portion was the decorative grass watering for institutions and businesses. I mean, and I know no one's probably clamoring to do that right now, but is there a sense of when that portion of all of this would be lifted?
Yeah, I mean, we're not ideological about it. It just, what I appreciate is a recognition in these big industrial office parks that why are we doing that when we're asking people to conserve water? By the way, 600,000 acre feet was conserved through those voluntary requests. It just doesn't make sense in an environment that is radically changing. I mean, we deal with this mega drought, 1,200-year mega drought in the western United States. And this is not atypical. You have these extreme years. Remember, last decade, we've had two of the wettest years in modern history. So we're likely to go right back into the old ways. And I just think it'd be a mistake to too quickly pull the trigger on that when people are starting to absorb an appreciation, understanding that may not be the highest and best use of water.
Hi, Governor. Laura Cordy with Politico here. We hear often criticisms about being in a constant state of emergency. Why pursue these measures through executive orders instead of working with the legislature?
Well, we're trying to balance we do that all the time. I mean, there are provisions pursuant to extreme droughts and require immediacy in terms of movement and momentum. And these provisions are well established and foundational with states large and small across the country. As it relates to moving quickly, as it relates to storms, the capacity to do that legislatively does not present itself. And so these provisions we think are appropriate on that basis. But legislature has been incredibly supportive of the vast majority of these principles, I think, across the aisle in terms of doing what we can to capture these extremes. And I think they'll see the wisdom, particularly on the groundwater side of this, to protect those provisions in our executive order going forward.
And then another question. Your January budget proposal maintained most drought funding but did not provide funding for flood protection organizations like the Central Valley Flood Protection Bureau we're asking for. Are we going to see changes in the May revise to that?
Yeah, we're assessing everything in the May revise, including our economic outlook, which is not necessarily going in the right direction. Preview. So we're going to do what we can, but I appreciate the foundational point you made that we protected and preserved the vast majority of that funding, and that's important to note. And that's suggestive of what you may see in the May revise, continuing to maintain that vigilance. And obviously on the basis of what's occurred in the last few months, augmentations in terms of the resource allocation and strategies that we'll be working with the legislature on.
Morning, Governor. Rachel Wolf, CBS 13, Sacramento, KOVR. And I've been told to say I'm the last question.
You don't have to, but I appreciate that.
Just so you know. Okay, so we are talking about an easing of the voluntary restrictions.
Yep.
Is there going to be an easing in terms of a push to meter private wells in the state of California?
Well, that's... I'll ask my Sigma experts here that can talk more about that. Karen, you want to talk about Sigma, or you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I'll just say briefly, Sigma, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, passed in 2014, all focused on protecting this incredible resource we have below ground. In a regular year, up to 40% of our water supply we pump from the ground, and during drought, up to 60%. So we need to continue to bring our groundwater basins into sustainability for the future of California. And part of that is continuing to improve the measurement of our usage of groundwater basins. Sigma is all about local leadership, and so local communities are deciding how to manage the groundwater basins. And part of that is continuing to improve the measurement of how water is being used. Our Department of Water Resources over the last couple of years has provided hundreds of millions of dollars to those local groundwater management agencies to continue their improved measurement, but also management of groundwater. So from our perspective, that needs to continue.
Given what's happened with the Consumnes River, with the amount of water and the potential snowmelt, Governor, is there any return to a discussion of a reservoir or dam upstream above the Wilton area?
About the details around Wilton, what's your understanding?
Yeah, I would just say that we continue, as the governor mentioned, we have such diverse conditions across our state. And so of that $8.4 billion, the vast majority of that is being funneled into local water agencies with local plans. And so coming out of this winter, I think we'll be working to assess, how those local plans change, if those local strategies change. And then as proposals come forward, I think we will very much want to assess them toward understanding how they can improve flood safety and also water supply.
Thank you.
Look, the magnitude of what we've all experienced requires us to quickly assess and reassess and reimagine our entire water storage and delivery and conveyance system. None of us are naive, and so none of this is static. That's obviously consistent with some of these executive orders and some of the actions we've taken. The old days of being able to reflect on an annual basis and having predictability in seasons, those days, at least seemingly, are gone. And so this is a new era, a new day, and today also marks a new era, a new day in California as it relates to these executive provisions that went into place in April of 2021. I want to again thank the people of the state of California for a job well done on their conservation efforts, their willingness to make conserving water a way of life. I really appreciate the incredible work that's being done in places like this property that we're on here today and all across the state in terms of novel strategies, as well as our long-term commitments to create new water in terms of our desalinization, brackish, not to sea, and other strategies on stormwater capture and recycling, which are foundational also to our efforts in California. So with that, answer the question, are we out of a drought? Mostly, but not completely. Thank you all very, very much for being here.